Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What you have just heard is psychoanalysis in action.
What is psychoanalysis?
Psychoanalysis is simply a method of enabling us to function better as human beings
How does psychoanalysis do this?
by probing the unconscious.
What is the unconscious?
Nobody knows.
How do you know you need psychoanalysis?
Well, if you're still listening to this record, that's a pretty good indication that you're ready for treatment.
Can you be certain?
No.
You can, however, take this test to determine whether or not you should be analyzed. Answer honestly.
Have you ever contemplated suicide? When you were a child, did you ever have the feeling that you were adopted? Do you have horrible secrets about yourself that you don't even talk about at parties? Do you become nostalgic for Paris in the springtime, even though you've never been there? Do signs which say smoking forbidden and rub, don't blot, create antisocial urges in you?
If you have answered yes or no to any of these questions, you need help. This record can help you. Another example of
Better things for better living through psychoanalysis.
How do you do? I am your analyst. What I'm going to do is to psychoanalyze you. Now, let me warn you, this is not going to be easy. Psychoanalysis, even under the best of conditions, is a difficult and a delicate process. And we are handicapped to a degree by the fact that there is a certain gulf between us, since I am speaking to you from a phonograph. We must bridge this gulf. Now, in order to do this, I will require your absolute cooperation. If you will put aside your doubts, your skepticisms, if you will forget that I am a phonograph and enter fully into the spirit of the psychoanalytic session, I think that you will be very surprised at the results. Now, before we actually begin the process of psychoanalysis, you will complete some tests. These tests will give me a clearer picture of your personality, or illness, as we call it, and at the same time will measure your intelligence. These tests are standard procedure. They're always given prior to admission to psychiatric clinics, mental hospitals, and the United States Army. These tests have been taken from the Wechsler-Bellevue multiphasic, and they are very simple. Ready? What year is this? Very good. Who is the President of the United States? Why must cousins not marry? I see that you consider yourself sophisticated. And why do you think we have child labor laws? Very good. Very good. You're doing very nicely. In this next test, I am going to read you a list of numbers, and as I read each group of numbers, you are to repeat them to me, backwards. This is a test designed to detect repressed hostility, all right? 406. 8121. 64891. 237160. And the last one, 974082649173 62190. Ah, well, don't upset yourself. In these tests, failure is as important as success. Don't worry. Just relax. Relax your muscles. Take a deep breath. Relax. Yeah. You comfortable now? Relaxed? Good. Quickly! How old are you? Why do you think that you responded as you did? Think about that. Now, without thinking, tell me, what is your reaction to these sounds? So much for psychological testing. Many patients attempt to thwart me in evaluating them. This is impossible. Psychoanalysis, you understand, deals with the total behavior. And so more important than the answers to the questions is the way that you answer them, or the way that you choose not to answer them. So even if you have remained absolutely silent, I still have plenty of material to go on. Also important is your attitude towards this record. Research has proved that a potentially good patient will react favorably, will recommend it to friends, and will buy extra copies of it as gifts. Many patients like to have several of them around the house. I encourage this because it makes them feel secure. If you will excuse me for a moment, I will score your tests. There will be a brief interlude of recorded music. My friend, our institutions are filled with men and women just like yourself who waited too long. Let's look at you objectively for a moment, as I see you. Your responses to the first test shows that you are worried about money. The second test, you have a feeling that your friends don't really like you, and you don't really like your friends. Number 4, you take a masochistic delight in being tyrannized over by waiters and cab drivers. Number 1 again, you have an exaggerated opinion of your value to society and at the same time doubt your worth and abilities. You have built up this reservoir of hostility which has no outlet and which has turned inward. And so you try to escape from yourself. You try everything, movies, television, Zen, Buddhism, travel, but wherever you go too, and spoil everything. You overindulge yourself to compensate for a lack of love. And your sex life, there's just no need for that kind of sex life. And so, now we begin to see you as you really are. Repressed, hostile, sexually maladjusted, frustrated, aggressive, schizoid, and masochistic. Now, what seems to be your problem? You must not be afraid to talk to me. I am here to help you. Please try and relax. Let us try free association. Tell me anything that comes into your mind. Don't be afraid that you will shock me. No matter how filthy those thoughts are, spill them out. I am an analyst. Filthy thoughts are my life. If you're going to maintain this hostile reticence, we might as well give up right now. I can't go through analysis for you. That is something that you must experience for yourself. Believe me, if I could, I would. I sincerely want to help you. That is why I have placed myself at your disposal. My training, my experience, my remarkable analytical powers. I have gone to a great deal of trouble to bring you this record. I have overcome discouragement, ridicule, superstitious prejudice, ignorance. You will notice, for example, that this record is not endorsed by the AMA. Why have I done this? Because I want to reach individuals that I could not reach by ordinary means. Individuals such as yourself. And help them to become decent, useful human beings. Well, I'll tell you what we will do. I realize that free association is difficult at first, and so we will work up to it. To get things moving, I will ask questions, and you will answer them, and we will begin simply. Tell me what you do in your spare time. Do you read? Mm-hmm. Do you ever claim to have read a book when actually you have just seen the movie? Do you play games of any sort with your friends? Chess, cards, Monopoly? When you played Monopoly as a child, were you disturbed by the fact that you couldn't always have Boardwalk and Park Place? If, by the simple act of pressing a button, you could kill a nameless South American Indian and collect $1 million and never be found out and never be punished, would you do it? Would you push that button? Think carefully. Forget about that now. Let us talk about your childhood. I want you just to let your mind wander back to when you were a child. The long, long afternoons. The first days at school. You little playmate. Can you remember your 8th birthday? Can you? At that time, what was the name of your best friend? Forget that I am a doctor for the moment and tell me what you remember. I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes now and let you talk. Please begin. Oh, I am sorry. Let me just ask you something for a moment here. How old were you when you first took an active interest in the opposite sex? An active interest? When I say active, I mean active. How old? We'll discuss this in more detail later, but for the moment, how would you characterize your sex life now? Adequate, inadequate, what would you say? Nicely put. You think that your current partner feels the same way? Honestly? Before we go on to your dreams, one last question, and this is very important. If you had to be painted from head to foot with kitchen enamel, what color would you choose? That is the color you have chosen? You see, the more we hide, the more we reveal. And now, let us look at one of your dreams. There are more misconceptions about dreams than about any other phase of psychoanalysis. Many people believe that all dreams are sexual in nature. If you dream, for example, of the Washington Monument, they say, aha, the Washington Monument is a sexual symbol. This is a fallacy. You have 3 minutes in which to tell me a dream, any dream, the one you had last night, if you can remember it, or any dream you can remember. Go ahead, try not to censor. Just let it out. Begin, please. I am waiting. Look here, my friend. You seem to regard this whole business as a joke. It is not, I assure you. I have been patient. Very patient. I believe that I have been amazingly patient with you, especially considering the way that you have been fooling around for this entire session. If you refuse to cooperate, take the needle off the record. I said take the needle off the record. All right? I'll do it.
What you are about to hear is a transcription of an actual psychoanalytic session. Nothing has been changed. Explanatory notes have been added, however, to aid you in your diagnosis. At the end of this session, Dr. Siegfried Gestalt, world-famous psychoanalyst, will give his diagnosis of the patient. Will it match your diagnosis? Can you analyze this patient? He is an adult, white male, 30 years old, the only child of well-to-do parents. He spent most of his adult life away from home at college, where he was not only an excellent student, but also took part in extracurricular athletics. Since the recent death of his father, whom he idolized, and the more recent remarriage of his mother, the patient has suffered from severe attacks of depression, withdrawal, a near catatonic apathy, and often toys with the notion of suicide. He refuses flatly to take part in family activities. His mother and his stepfather have become extremely concerned over his behavior since he's broken off with his fiancée, insulted many of their friends, and has begun to talk to himself. There appears to be nothing physically wrong with the patient other than the fact that he is somewhat overweight. His mother describes him as being fat and scant of breath, which indicates that he might be asthmatic, almost certainly a psychosomatic condition. What is really wrong with the patient? Why this sudden change? Why at 30 does he feel his life is over? The answers to these questions, and many more, are for you to discover. How good an analyst are you? Just a moment. The door is opening, and I believe it... Yes, it is. It is the patient. He's almost 15 minutes late. He nods to Dr. Siegfried Gestalt, world-famous psychoanalyst. Dr. Gestalt smiles and nods back. The patient is a pudgy man, medium height. I should say about 5'6" or 7. He's conservatively dressed. In point of fact, the patient is dressed entirely in black. Now, he's sitting down on the couch. His movements are somewhat lethargic, and he seems quite depressed. Dr. Gestalt has opened his notebook. The patient has just taken a Kleenex. There is a box of Kleenex immediately beside the couch. And now we will hear Dr. Siegfried Gestalt, world-famous psychoanalyst, and his patient in psychoanalysis.
Well, now, I understand that you've been having a little difficulty at home, yeah? You must needs have heard how I am punished with sore distraction. What I have done, I here proclaim, was madness. Yeah. I can accept that. And how did this madness of yours manifest itself? Sir, in my heart there was a kind of fighting that would not let me sleep.
Are you taking notes? If you have said schizoid tendencies, you are correct.
Do you have this feeling often? I am but mad northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw.
The patient is being facetious, an obvious attempt to deny his problem by making light of it.
You say that you are troubled by insomnia and this feeling that you are divided against yourself. This must make life difficult for you, yeah?
I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises. And indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory.
Yeah, I see, sterile promontory.
Dr. Gestalt obviously feels that it's too early in the session to investigate what sterile promontory means to the patient, since this is obviously a loaded phrase. To examine this now would probably mobilize a great deal of resistance on the patient's part and would hinder establishing a positive transference. There is, however, another phrase that might lead to something. The patient has stated that he has forgone all custom of exercises.
Tell me, why is it that you have stopped exercising?
Yes. It appears that Dr. Gestalt has struck a sensitive area. Apparently exercise or the lack of exercise does have some bearing on the patient's problem. What this is we shall see in just a moment. The patient is lying with his right arm over his forehead, protectively. He's beginning to perspire. And now the patient's lips are moving as if he were trying to answer. The patient is struggling with himself, trying to overcome his own resistance. And now we will see if... Yes, he is. He is going to speak.
Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter.
The patient wishes that he could lose weight. He is troubled by an excess of flesh, which he feels is too solid. The everlasting, or God, of course, refers to the patient's father. The patient cannot lose weight because of his father's prohibition against self-slaughter, or self-abuse. The patient's choice of words here is extremely revealing. Notice, for example, the phrase, fixed his cannon.
Oh, God. God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. The world seems unprofitable to you? Fiant, fie. It is an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely.
The world no longer tastes good to the patient. He finds it stale and flat. The unweeded garden that is allowed to grow to seed and is neglected refers to the patient himself. A garden which grows to seed has reached full maturity. The garden has fulfilled itself, but is of no use to those who planted it. The mature garden contains weeds, which are rank and gross, or fat. If the patient could weed the garden and destroy the fat part of himself, he would be cared for. An obvious desire to return to childhood by shedding his maturity, or masculinity.
That it should come to this. But 2 months dead. Nay, not so much, not 2.
Why is the patient confused on this point?
So excellent a king that was, to this, Hyperion to a satyr.
It is the patient's stepfather whom he is comparing to a satyr.
So loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth, must I remember? That is the only way that psychoanalysis can help you. We must face the truth about ourselves, no matter how painful. And now you say that your father was extremely loving to your mother. How did she feel about him at this time? Why, she would hang on him as if increase in appetite had grown by what it fed on.
The patient describes his mother's feeling for his father in terms of food. Remember that the patient thinks of himself as a garden gone to seed, no longer able to bear fruit. If the patient equates eating with loving, how must he feel about himself as a love object?
And yet, within a month... Let not me think on't. Frailty, thy name is woman.
The patient does not seem to be aware that he's made a striking insight into his problem. Frailty, thy name is woman. Women are frail, i.e. small and weak, as opposed to being strong and fat. The patient is troubled by his fatness and wishes to become thin or frail, like a woman.
A little month. Or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body. Like Niobe, all tears.
Here we have the image of the patient's mother, all tears. This is another recurrent image. How does this relate to the patient's desire to resolve himself into a dew?
Why, she... Even she... Oh, God, a beast that once discourse of reason would have mourned longer. Married with mine uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules.
Here the patient is fishing for a compliment.
Within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married. Oh, most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot come to good. But break my heart, for I must hold my tongue.
What does the patient really mean? when he says that he must hold his tongue. He's lying rigidly on the couch. His face is flushed. He's breathing heavily. He has started to fiddle with a dagger.
A moment ago you mentioned that your uncle or your stepfather was, at any rate, I detected a certain amount of resentment towards him, did I not? Bloody, bawdy villain. Remorseless, treacherous, lecherous, kindless villain! Ah, vengeance! That's right, just let it out. It is very painful to carry around all this feeling of hostility bottled up inside, isn't it? Come now, you must not be afraid to talk to me. So you have this hostility towards your uncle.
It is but foolery. But it is such a kind of gain-giving as would, perhaps, trouble a woman.
Yeah, I see, yeah.
Make a note of that statement.
It is a pity that we have to stop now, just when we have got into something very interesting. Between now and our next session, you might think about in what situations you feel like a woman. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into this now. Our time is up.
Time is out of joint. Oh, cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right.
Yeah. Well, I'll see you at the same time next week.
The patient has risen from the couch. He shakes hands with Dr. Siegfried Gestalt, world-famous psychoanalyst. The patient seems even more depressed than before and seems reluctant to leave. Dr. Gestalt hands the patient his dagger, which he'd forgotten. The patient did give us a bad moment or two in the latter part of the session when it appeared that he might discover the microphone hidden in the box of Kleenex, which would, of course, undermine the patient's confidence in the analyst. This concludes the psychoanalytic session, qua psychoanalytic session. If you have taken careful notes, you should have sufficient material at hand now to make your diagnosis. Stop the record, correlate your notes, and then compare your diagnosis with that of Dr. Siegfried Gestalt, world-famous psychoanalyst, which follows on the next band.
Those of you who have said that the patient is a product of over-rigorous toilet training, you're guessing. Now, what do we know about the patient? The most obvious facts are that he is fat and he is suicidally depressed. And we must ask ourselves, what does this accomplish for the patient? First, we will examine fat. From what the patient has said, we see that fatness, or flesh, represents maturity and masculinity to the patient. The less he feels like a man in his mind, the more he must feel like a man in his body. This is a fairly simple mechanism. And now his depression. The patient no longer finds the world attractive. It seems empty and meaningless to him. Actually, this is very common, and we know that what the patient really means is that he feels empty and worthless, lacking in ego support and narcissistic supplies. Depression and suicide, by the way, are basically hostile gestures. The violence he wishes to do himself is inhibited hostility towards the person or persons who are withholding from him the needed narcissistic supplies. The patient is just furious at somebody. Let us retrace our steps. We discovered that the patient wants to lose weight. In the light of what we know about his fatness, we know that the patient believes that losing weight will enable him to return to a childlike and helpless condition in which he will be cared for. In order to become a child, he must sacrifice the mature part of himself, his masculinity, and so he wants to become a child. And who cares for children? Their mothers. Mother and child are traditionally seen as one. The patient wants to become one with his mother. But there is another drive at work here at the same time. Several times during the session, the patient has referred to himself as womanly, being frail, like the weaker sex. It appears that he not only wants to become a child, he wants to become a woman. This is reasonable, after all. If the patient actually became one with his mother in the literal sense, he would necessarily be a woman, would he not? Yeah, He would. And so the patient wants to be one with his mother and wants to be a woman. Putting fact together with fact, we see that what the patient actually wants is to be his mother. He identifies with her completely. Why is this? What does she have that the patient wants? To understand this, we must look at the patient's outburst against his uncle. Why should the patient hate him? The uncle represents no threat to the patient. We are not dealing with an Oedipal triangle here. That is to say, the patient does not feel thwarted by his uncle in a desire to marry his mother, because, as we have noticed, he identifies with her. And yet, the violence of his outburst against his uncle would seem to indicate a jealous hate. A jealous hate, yeah, but not of his uncle. He is hiding his true feelings behind an apparent hostility towards his uncle because he will not admit to himself that whom he actually hates is his mother. Why? Why does he hate his mother? Because he is jealous of her. Why? Because he is in love with his uncle. Once we understand this, the entire pattern becomes clear. The patient does want to be cared for as a child, yeah, but also as a woman, and not by his mother. The patient wants to be his uncle's child bride. Unconsciously, of course. There are several facts that give support to this hypothesis. For example, notice the words the patient chooses to describe the uncle. Bloody, bawdy, lecherous, and a satyr. All of these are sexual references. Also, in our second session, the patient revealed to me that he had had an hallucination in which the spirit of his dead father had come to him and told him that he had not died from natural causes, but had been poisoned by the uncle. And what method did he use? He poured something nasty in his ear. In the light of Freudian dream symbolism, the meaning of this hallucination is painfully clear, particularly when you consider that the patient and his father had the same name. The hallucination was simply a dream of wish fulfillment. Unfortunately, I cannot give a clinical analysis of the symbolism of this dream unless we want this record thoroughly banned, but let me tell you, it's pretty dirty. There are other corroborations of this, but you can go back and find them for yourself. Good practice for you. So much for diagnosis. As for therapy, I recommended to the patient that he have a talk with his uncle, man to man, try to get some difficulties on the verbal level. It was important for the patient to regain confidence in handling his reality situation. I, unfortunately, did not see the patient again. He broke all of his subsequent appointments with me, and I was extremely curious to discover how the patient had acted on my advice. And so I sent a psychiatric social worker to his home. It was rather difficult for the caseworker to gather coherent information because most of the household had been killed, in one way or another, by the patient. Among the dead were the patient's fiancé, the brother of the patient's fiancé, the father of the patient's fiancé, the patient's stepfather, the patient's mother, and the patient himself. While this was not actually what I had in mind, it did show a certain amount of initiative on the patient's part, which is always a good sign. In conclusion, I would like to point out that this unpleasantness did not indicate that the treatment was a failure. There are no failures in psychoanalysis, because from each experience such as this, we learn. And the more we learn, the more we grow. And the more we grow, the better equipped we are to carry on our never-ending battle to stamp out mental health.